Jeroboam emerges in the pages of biblical history as a figure who plays a crucial role in shaping the destiny of Israel after a decisive moment of political and social fracture. This character, not very different from contemporary leaders who grapple with the legacy and expectations of their predecessors, found himself at the helm of a divided kingdom at a turning point that would forever mark the course of his people. After the death of the wise King Solomon, known for his wealth and wisdom but whose end was marked by the deviation from pure faith, the nation of Israel found itself at a breaking point. Solomon, who had built the temple and consolidated the kingdom, had also sown the seeds of discord through his policies and his inclination towards other gods, which would eventually lead to the division of the kingdom. In this context, Jeroboam rises as an emerging leader who, due to his ability and diligence, was placed by Solomon in charge of the works of the important tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, descendants of Joseph, demonstrating the king's trust in his abilities. Jeroboam's life changed through an encounter that seems taken from an epic narrative, in which he meets the prophet Ahijah of Shiloh. This encounter was not by chance, but an act of divine providence. Ahijah, dressed in a new cloak, performs a prophetic act by tearing it into 12 pieces, handing 10 to Jeroboam. This act symbolized the Lord's decision to grant Jeroboam leadership over 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel, leaving only 2 under the dynasty of David, as a direct result of Solomon's infidelity. The Lord, through the prophet, offers Jeroboam a resounding promise and at the same time a formidable challenge: to follow the ways of God and obey His commandments and statutes as David did. If he did this, Jeroboam would have the opportunity to establish a lasting dynasty. This promise is found in 1 Kings 11:38, where God says, "And if you pay attention to all that I command you and follow my ways and do what is right in my eyes, obeying my decrees and commands, as my servant David did, I will be with you. I will build for you a lasting dynasty, as I did for David, and I will give you Israel." However, Jeroboam's life takes a tragic turn. After rebelling against Solomon's oppressive policies and fleeing to Egypt to save his life from the angry king, Jeroboam returns to his homeland only to face a new challenge. At that time, Rehoboam, Solomon's son, was preparing to succeed his father. The people, burdened by Solomon's policies, saw in Jeroboam a figure of hope and leadership. They asked Rehoboam, through Jeroboam, for relief and a change in oppressive policies. Rehoboam, at a critical moment, has the opportunity to take a path of wisdom by accepting the advice of the elders to ease the people's burden, but influenced by his contemporaries and friends, he decides to reject this option, choosing instead to increase oppression and taxes. This act of folly culminates in the division of the kingdom. Jeroboam becomes the king of Israel in the north, and Rehoboam remains with Judah and Benjamin in the south. Fear and anxiety about maintaining the loyalty of his people lead Jeroboam to make decisions that stray even further from God's laws. In an attempt to consolidate his power and prevent his people from returning to Jerusalem to worship in the temple, he makes a fateful error: the creation of idols in the form of golden calves, falsely asserting that these were the gods that had freed Israel from Egypt. This not only contradicted God's commandments but also established a precedent of idolatry that would have profound and lasting repercussions for the 10 tribes under his command. The story of Jeroboam is one of rise and fall, of promise and warning. It is a reminder of the weight of leadership responsibility and the consequences of personal choices, not only for oneself but for an entire nation. It is a narrative that provides not only a historical account but also eternal lessons about fidelity, obedience, and humility before divine will. Jeroboam, in his attempt to strengthen his kingdom and ensure the devotion of his people away from Judah, made decisions that would be seen as grave transgressions in the eyes of God, affecting the course of Israel's history. He established golden calf idols in 2 strategic locations, Bethel and Dan, situated at opposite ends of his kingdom. Bethel, to the south, near the border with Judah, and Dan, in the far north, served as worship centers so as people would not feel the need to pilgrimage to Jerusalem. This was not merely an act of religious decentralization, but a direct break with the tradition of exclusive worship of Yahweh, which had been maintained in Solomon's temple. Jeroboam did not stop there. He delved further into his deviation by building altars for these idols and appointing men outside the tribe of Levi as priests, breaking with the tradition that only Levites should occupy this holy role. The creation of a religious festival that mimicked the one celebrated in Judah, but in honor of his idols, was another link in this chain of rebellion. The 15th day of the 8th month became the date Jeroboam chose to offer sacrifices at the altar of Bethel, thus consolidating his own religious calendar in opposition to that established in Judah. The severity of these acts was such that God sent a prophet from Judah to Bethel. This man of God confronted Jeroboam just as he was offering incense on the altar, issuing a prophecy that would shake the foundations of his dynasty. He announced the birth of Josiah, of the dynasty of David, who would eventually sacrifice upon that altar the idolatrous priests, and human bones would be burned on it. To confirm his message, the prophet gave an immediate sign: the altar would break, and the ashes would be scattered. The fulfillment of this sign was dramatically manifested when Jeroboam, in an act of fury, tried to seize the prophet, extending his hand towards him, but at that moment his hand became paralyzed. Simultaneously, the altar broke and the ashes were scattered, just as had been prophesied. Overwhelmed by these events, Jeroboam asked the prophet to intercede for him before God to restore his hand, which happened. But not even this miracle led Jeroboam to reflection and repentance. Persistent in his erroneous ways, Jeroboam continued his practice of appointing priests from among the common people, further diluting the sanctity of the priestly vocation established by God. This series of sins led to the promulgation of a divine judgment, the complete eradication of Jeroboam's dynasty from the face of the earth. Amidst this turmoil, Jeroboam's son Abijah fell gravely ill. Jeroboam, perhaps recalling the veracity of the word of the prophet Ahijah, who in his time had announced he would reign over Israel, sent his wife disguised to consult the same prophet, now old and blind. Ahijah, however, knew the true identity of the visitor before she spoke and conveyed to her a divine message of imminent judgment. This message, delivered to Jeroboam's wife for her to communicate, declared the ruin of his house due to blatant idolatry and turning away from God. The prophet Ahijah, pronouncing God's words, outlined the tragic fall that was to come, the extinction of Jeroboam's male line, both free and slave, and the disappearance of his dynasty, compared to the burning of trash until no trace is left. Even in the midst of this severe condemnation, there was a glimmer of mercy. Jeroboam's sick son, who had found favor in the eyes of God, would be the only one to receive a dignified burial, dying as soon as his mother set foot in the city, thus fulfilling Ahijah's prophecy and marking a somber end to an era of disobedience. The figure of Jeroboam is portrayed in the scriptures as a leader whose governance was marked by controversial decisions and actions that triggered divine disapproval. The Bible tells us that Jeroboam reigned over Israel for 2 decades and a couple of years. This period of time, which initially promised hope and renewal, ended in disillusionment and spiritual failure. Upon his death, his son Nadab took the reins of power, but his time on the throne was brief, lasting just 2 years, as narrated in 1 Kings 15. Nadab, following in his father's footsteps, also incurred what the scriptures describe as evil in the eyes of the Lord, continuing the mistakes and sinful legacy of Jeroboam. He showed no signs of breaking with the idolatrous practices his father had instituted, and it is this persistence in sin that precipitated his end at the hands of Baasha, son of Ahijah of the tribe of Issachar. Baasha's ascent to the throne not only marked a change in leadership but also, in accordance with the divine judgment transmitted by the prophet Ahijah, resulted in the annihilation of the entire lineage of Jeroboam, thus fulfilling the prophetic word given previously. The account of Jeroboam and his descendants, beyond being a mere chronicle of ancient events, acts as a profound reflection on leadership, morality, and spirituality. It invites us to consider how ambition and the pursuit of personal interests can divert even the most promising of leaders. Jeroboam, who had been chosen by God and endowed with the promise of a lasting dynasty if he maintained his fidelity, fell into the trap of ambition and self-preservation. He was more concerned with retaining his political power and preventing his people from returning to loyalty to the king of Judah, which ultimately led to the ruin of his house. The story of this Israelite king highlights the importance of humility and obedience to God. It teaches us that in the pursuit of divine purpose, true greatness is found in serving others and submitting to God's will, not in the accumulation of power. The negative example of Jeroboam and his successors reminds us that the consequences of deviating from divine precepts can be lasting and affect not only oneself but future generations. And with these reflections, we come to the end of this analysis, hoping that it has been a great blessing and spiritual enrichment for you. I send a warm greeting to everyone, with the best wishes that God blesses you abundantly. With this, I say goodbye, but not before reminding you that if God wills, we will continue sharing and learning together in future encounters. Until next time, and may God bless you.